San Antonio, it is finally happening. May of 2024, we'll have nonstop flights from San Antonio to Europe. Get ready to fly to Europe.
When I first arrived here as the director of the airport, it was one of the most important elements that was given to me. So happy to announce today that we've accomplished it with service going into Europe with Condor Airlines.
I'm extremely proud to be here today, going public with the word that Condor will be flying nonstop between San Antonio into Frankfurt. What a new route brings to a community, usually we bridge two economies, we bridge two cultures, and I'm looking forward that this is something that we bring to the greater San Antonio area, but also to the greater Frankfurt area.
This is a huge milestone. The economic impact of these direct flights will ripple through our economy. So proud of the airport team and the work they've done. And I'm thankful that Condor has decided to invest in San Antonio. So it's great news all around.
We are beyond thrilled about what this nonstop route to Frankfurt means for our San Antonio economy and our residents today. HEB, USAA, Valero, and so many others encouraged us to prioritize air service and air connectivity to make routes like today's announcement possible.
Today's exciting announcement connects our city with the world. It opens up all of German residents to the beauty of San Antonio.
A big heartfelt thank you to everyone who's here today for all your support. Go out and let the world know SAT will be going to Frankfurt.
We'll be flying nonstop to Frankfurt, Germany, which means in the heart of Europe, and easy connectivity to anywhere else in the world. So this is a great day for San Antonio International. It's a great day for San Antonio and the world.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining our 6th annual San Antonio Report City Fest. Our annual Urban Ideas Festival will be hosting both events online and in person throughout San Antonio this week. We are exploring the concept of how San Antonio could, would, should, if it is, if it isn't, meeting the moment of this incredible growth in our community. Before we start, we got to give a thanks to our sponsors who have made this event possible free online for our entire community to enjoy. We want to invite you, if you learned something today, to share this with your network. There will be a link to the full conversation after this event. We owe a special thank you to our 2023 presenting sponsor, the City of San Antonio, also to our Changemaker event, engagement, innovation, and city builder sponsors for supporting this year's event. A full list of our sponsors can be found at cityfestsa.org. But you too can become a contributor to local nonprofit journalism by becoming a San Antonio Report member today. There should be a link in the chat. And let me kick it over to Assistant City Manager Jeff Coyle for a couple of words from the City of San Antonio.
Andrea, thank you very much. The city is really proud and thrilled to sponsor San Antonio City Fest. It's always such a great exchange of ideas, a great dialogue about the issues facing our community. This year's been no different. The opening interview with our city manager, Eric Walsh, covered a lot of ground. Your chief editor, Lee Munsell, did an outstanding job. And I'm really excited about this panel coming up. Everybody loves to talk transportation. All 4 of your panelists are esteemed experts in the field. And if I know anything about you as the moderator, Andrea, you are well-researched and ready to ask some good questions for the audience. So thank you again from the City of San Antonio. Thank you to the San Antonio Report.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. If you've caught any of our panels so far, you've heard us say this over and over again. Bexar County is one of the fastest growing parts of this country. The City of San Antonio is projected to welcome 1 million new residents between 2010 and 2040. So along with the growing population comes growing transportation and infrastructure needs. And we'll be talking to our panel of experts today about how Bexar County is preparing for that growth, both in adjusting to sprawling population growth, as well as infill and increased highway demands. So we're going to be talking about big changes coming to the airport, coming to our transit system, We're going to be mostly talking about what does the future of transportation in San Antonio look like, and are we ready? Our panelists today represent 4 really different parts of that challenge. First up, we have Jeffrey Arndt, President and CEO of Via Metropolitan Transit. Jeff spent 25 years working on transit in Harris County before joining Via in 2012, but I recently heard him say that this past 10 years working at Via has been the best 10 years of his life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Next up, we have Jesus Saenz, Director of Airports for the San Antonio Airport Systems. Jesus was also poached from our neighbors to the east. He was previously the Chief Operating Officer for the Houston Airport System before coming to San Antonio in 2020.
Yes, thank you for having me.
We also have Brian, the Texas Highwayman Purcell. Brian has a degree in urban and regional planning, but he's not affiliated with any of the transportation agencies. He shares our spirit of curiosity and runs a website dedicated to informing the public about transportation. The Texas Department of Transportation liked it so much that they bestowed on Brian their highest civilian honor, a Road Hand Award. Welcome, Brian.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And last, we have Phil Lasley, a research scientist and assistant program manager with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute's Mobility Analysis Program. Phil has also collaborated with TxDOT on bike mobility projects. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much.
We invited the Texas Department of Transportation to participate in today's event, but they are traveling back from a conference today and weren't able to make it. So we're going to lean on Brian and Phil to fill in that perspective as needed. Being compared to other major metropolitan areas in preparing for growth in Texas, where are we behind, and what are the big challenges that we see that are unique to San Antonio?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll say too that in the mobility analysis program where I work, we work a lot with the Texas 100 Most Congested Roadways report. If anyone has seen or is familiar with that from the news, we're the ones behind some of that. So I can say San Antonio, for its size, is actually pretty well off compared to cities nationally and other cities in Texas. Y'all have had good, stable growth without the boom and bust cycles that some of the other cities in Texas have had, which has actually been really, really good for planning. The other thing is there have been very wise leadership in San Antonio over the years that has helped projects be built when money became available. So from the congestion standpoint, San Antonio has actually stayed ahead of the worst of traffic for years. And if you look at the 100 most congested roadways in Texas, San Antonio frequently ranks at the bottom of that list. That's a list you don't want to be on. Houston, Dallas always dominate that list, but San Antonio has done a good job staying off that list for the most part. So y'all are doing a pretty good job there.
And specific challenges that San Antonio faces.
Yeah, with that steady growth, there's also been a lack of densification. Your downtown skyline looks a bit different than some of the other downtown skylines, and that's for better or worse. That's uniquely San Antonio. That actually makes doing things like providing really efficient transit extremely difficult. So Via has had their work cut out for them over the years, but they do a pretty good job doing what they're doing. In addressing traffic concerns, one of the things that we tell people is you can't build yourself out of traffic. You're always going to have traffic there. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't add capacity when it's appropriate to. But what it also means is that we need to look at providing options for people to get around. So if you have to get across town at rush hour, you have several different options to get there efficiently and in a timely manner.
Okay, so let's bring the rest of this crowd in on this question. Sort of outline for us what you see as the biggest challenges in meeting that forthcoming growth from your perspective at your respective agencies, starting with Brian.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Phil said, that I think San Antonio has done a good job in the past of trying to stay ahead of congestion. It's a never-ending battle, like a whack-a-mole game, so to speak. I think probably the biggest challenge is what the biggest challenge has always been. That's getting funding in a timely manner to build the projects that you need, and to try to maybe not stay ahead of the growth, because that's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but at least try to keep close enough behind it that you're able to manage it appropriately.
And Jeff?
Certainly, first of all, Phil, I want to correct you. You said that VIA has done a pretty good job, and I think VIA has done an excellent job. But then I'm biased, correct? So I think one of the points that Phil made, which is our development pattern, is a challenge, and it will continue to be a challenge. It's certainly a challenge for transportation, public transportation, in its traditional form, at least. We've implemented different forms of transportation now that take into account low density, but nonetheless, it's a challenge. And I think the whole region, and it really goes a great deal also to what's been said previously, the whole region, I feel, needs to focus on a diversification of modes. We tend to, so for example, yesterday, we approved a state constitutional amendment that will build a fund for enhancing energy, but we excluded renewable energies from that opportunity. Typically, the propositions that go to the voters on increasing transportation funding on a state basis exclude public transportation from that. And I believe, just like the energy sector or the water sector, that you can't build your way out of it. I'm not saying that freeways will not always be a portion of what we do here, but our public transportation investment has put us at a real disadvantage from the perspective that the amount of funding we get only allows us to serve at a very broad frequency, 30 to 60 minutes, not attractive to most people who have options. And so we are focusing our program, and I think we'll maybe talk a bit later, on our advanced rapid transit line, which tries to resolve, at least in those corridors, some of those issues.
Yeah, we will definitely come back to some of those things. Jesus.
Yeah, I guess the best approach I'd like to offer is, it's never easy. There's a number of strategic master plans that go into effect, whether it's the State Department, whether it's, the here with the city of San Antonio or the county. And as we look at the airport, I think our largest obstacle is trying to match demand with capacity. And there's been, a large number of disruptors that have occurred, not only here locally in the state, but when you start to look at the migrations that are coming from other states coming into here, it makes it really difficult. So, whether you're talking about the modes of transportation that are being utilized, in and off of, the interstate or, the highways coming in to the city of San Antonio, and then utilizing the airport, those changes are difficult, to adjust and adapt to. And it's important that we're always trying to, stay at least 10 steps ahead of, what that demand is, to ensure that we have the capacity to be able to, address those issues as best as possible. As we look at, the overall level of service that we're providing, whether it's on the roadway or it's in air service development or the capacity of the airport, how are we staying ahead of the needs so that we can continue to provide a good level of service, is what I would offer.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of synergy right now between the projects at VIA and at the airport. But something from our perspective that seems like a bit of a challenge is that we hear from transportation experts that you are preparing for this forthcoming population boom and need to be proactive, but the major players don't seem to always be on the same page about what it is that we're preparing for. Bruce Bugg, our Transportation Commission chair, who was a San Antonian, said at a transportation gathering, there's one statistic that drives a lot of our thinking, and it is that 93% of Texans get behind the wheel of a car or truck as their primary means of transportation. Meanwhile, the city and VIA are preparing for more public transportation, more residents who might not even own cars, and downtown that's more residential and theoretically more walkable with that. Is one vision right and the other wrong? And how are the various transportation organizations going to work together in the future so that taxpayers aren't left holding the bucket on major projects? And
You'd like me to begin?
Yes.
So I've heard that the 90% thing, and I think it's true. And like I said, I will always believe that freeways will be a major part of our transportation network. But if you look at the money that's spent by the state in transportation locally, the state of Texas spends $0 on public transportation in Bexar County, zero. And so to some degree, that percentage is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I continue to pour money into roadways, and I put zero money into public transportation, which is, a challenge for us. Do I work with TxDOT? Yes, absolutely. I think before we talked today, we talked about HOV lanes, and we're continuing to work with them because HOV lanes are a way to provide service that can be attractive to commuters because it can provide time benefits. So we've worked with TxDOT on that. Jesus and I, just this morning, we're talking about what we can do with the current service that VIA operates between the Stone Oak Park and Ride, directly express to the airport, from there directly express to downtown, from there directly express to Brooks. So we have a pretty good connectivity thing there, but we need to rework our schedule. And so, yeah, we're working together in those regards. My biggest constraint is that our funding is between 50 and 75% less than the other major transit systems in Texas, which makes it difficult for us to be able to gain access to the funds to provide high capacity transit.
Yeah, I'm not sure everybody understands how VIA is funded. You don't receive any money from the state. Would you explain briefly how VIA is funded?
So the state back in the 70s provided the opportunity for large cities to create metropolitan transit authorities. And that's our full name, VIA Metropolitan Transit Authority. And they enabled local municipalities to levy up to 1 cent sales tax to do that. But that 1 cent sales tax had to be within the 2 cents that the state provides for local funding. VIA happened to have been the first MTA created in the state of Texas, and the local community pursued 1/2 cent. Now, Austin, Dallas, and Houston followed suit in becoming MTAs, but they all went with a full cent. Sales tax represents 85% of my funding. I get some federal funding at the 15% level, and the rest of in-revenues are very small. So that sales tax revenue is really important. Well, San Antonio, as I said, brings in, let's just say in rough figures, $250 million a year, where Houston, same size service area, brings in $800 million a year. Well, you can imagine that happening over our 45-year history, the difference in the funding. So when I was at Houston, we were able to build the first light rail out of our savings account. VIA, with our funding, we've not been able to establish a savings account. But we have recently, in 2020, received voter support to send some additional sales tax to VIA beginning in 2026, which is what has now finally enabled us to pursue the ART projects, and for the first time in San Antonio or VIA's history, to pursue money out of the major capital improvement grant program that the feds offer.
And Phil, do you want to take a stab at that, sort of how these competing visions work together or work against each other sometimes?
Yeah, it's definitely not an either or, but a yes and kind of situation. I can't speak for TxDOT, but I can speak to our interactions with them and some of the local agencies. Oftentimes there are two different competing goals happening. And what might be the goal of TxDOT might not be the same goals that the city of San Antonio has. Those aren't bad necessarily in any regard, and they may conflict and they may not conflict. But for example, TxDOT, their general mission is to move people around the state. So going from city to city. Additionally, they're a lot more interested in freight oftentimes, which frequently gets left out of the local discussion. At the city level, we don't necessarily think all the time about the big semi trucks going through our city unless it's a nuisance to us. But we have to remember that it's that movement of goods that allows us to to manufacture things, to receive the things that we order in a timely manner, et cetera. And so, sometimes those are competing visions. And that's why it's really important that we look at different options and better ways to operate the capacity that we already have. TxDOT is very, very good at building things. They are dipping their toe into the idea of operating what they have more efficiently. And, other states are pretty good at that. TxDOT will be good at that in the future, just because it's prohibitive to build all the capacity that we necessarily need. But we can do things that, encourage a more efficient use of our system.
Brian?
Yeah, I think Phil took a little bit of what I was going to say about definitely operating what you have more efficiently. Other states and other countries, especially in Europe, have done a much better job of that than we have here, but we are getting on that bandwagon. The local TxDOT has kind of led that effort. TransGuide coming online back in the 90s was kind of their first foray into that. So being able to take what you already have, manage it better, deal with incidents that happen, and so forth. The next phase of that is kind of not building necessarily new capacity projects as well as rather than taking, for example, intersections and making them function better, different types of intersections, novel intersections like you've seen with 1604 and Bandera, for example, or super street concepts. Those are different ways of building for the future that you don't have the conventional expansion. You're just operating it, or you're making things work better. I'd also like to say that it's not necessarily an either or when it comes to modes. It's more of a multimodal. Bigger cities tend to be more multimodal. You drive in your car for a little bit to maybe a park and ride, and then you can take a bus or a train, or maybe you ride your bike and then you can walk or so forth. So I think kind of taking all these things together is what we need to be looking at, not necessarily any single mode. I think when they all work together, you get a bigger bang for your buck.
Jesus, we've got a question for you here. More and more people are flying into San Antonio, and you seem to be opening a new direct flight every couple of hours now, but your $2.5 billion airport redevelopment project won't be completed until 2028. How will you make it work in the meantime with the existing infrastructure? And is this going to be a nightmare for San Antonians on the road and in the airport in the meantime?
Well, first I'd say no, it's not going to be a nightmare. It's about the importance of ensuring that you know exactly what your passenger counts are. So we do a number of different concept of operations, which is what we call ConOps, for all of these peak periods. But it's why we had a specific strategy that we started to outline in probably the earlier part of 2021 when we were going through the pandemic. As you think back historically, the impacts that have happened across the globe, the overall 9/11 impact and what that was to the impact to the aviation industry. You go back to 2008 and the big hit that we took from the Great Recession that was happening during that period when people were not flying. So we are actually executing on a specific strategy that we put together, which is why we're elated of the wins that we've had. They're not easy to come by, and it's a reflection of the work, a lot of hard work by the entire team. And knowing that Mexico was going to be a big piece of that is what you've seen here recently with the announcements of Torreon, Querétaro, increased service going into León, increased service going into Monterrey, and increased service going into Mexico City. So that's all specific and intentional as it relates to getting into that central corridor of the entire Mexico country that we want to hit. Next phase for us is starting to look at all the leisure markets that are there as well. So that's something that we will be hitting heavily. The transatlantic piece was enormous for us, and that's something that has never happened here. A lot of work by the entire air service development team that's been going on for quite some period, but strategically we find that in to ensure that we were successful for summer of 2024. as you look at, as I mentioned earlier, with regards to matching capacity to demand, and you look at the overall asset that exists today with Terminal A and Terminal B, it's why, as we started to launch these efforts and initiatives with regards to growing air service development, they needed to match what's going to happen with the asset. 3 additional gates, 2 into Terminal B and 1 into Terminal A, right during COVID, that we started to execute on some of those development programs, coupled with the fact, the announcement that we just announced, just earlier last month with regards to the expansion of a ground load facility in order to shift and better utilize the overall asset. All of that is bridging us into the expansion of the new terminal complex that will add 850,000 square feet and 17 additional gates to the complex in preparation for where we're going. It's a constant, management effort that needs to occur as we talk about the modes of transportation and how many people are moving, and the way by which, let's just put it, the way Texans like to move. We in the air need to monitor that as well, as the activities shift and adapt. And when I arrived, I feel like a very attractive movement is going into the trans-border effort of going into Mexico, along with additional announcements. You heard Southwest Airlines just announced going into Burbank, California. You've got Spirit that is announcing an additional flight going into Newark. All of those efforts are specific and intentional, that further provide additional service that creates a competitive environment for these airlines, that ultimately results in a better product to the consumer and the people that are utilizing it. Which takes me back, to the question that we were talking about earlier, as it relates to we call them passenger activity levels. We call them, passenger personas. It's what is the consumer behavior happening? And as those shifts are happening, we can get into a long discussion about the impact of remote work, individuals, people that are now doing work while they're doing leisure. We call it be leisure, and they're going off into different leisure destinations, but they're remote working and still doing their job. That's an impact to our industry and the way people move. You think back in 2008 with the transportation network companies, the TNCs, and the impact that they had to the modes of transportation and how people are moving. All of these elements have to come into play in order for us to be successful and be up to date on where those transitions are happening, in order for us, and this is the key for us, to be able to be agile and adaptive to what's happening, based on what your consumer demand is and what your consumer behaviors are. So that's kind of what we focus on as we move forward. We have a specific strategy that we launched in 2023. We started to put that together in 2021 and 2022, and that will last us and take us through 2028 when we build out the new terminal complex.
Yeah, I'm reminded in this that your boss told my boss earlier this week in our keynote address that we need to ask you about vertical launch. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question, Andrea, with regards to the future. And we've inside of our ground transportation center, as we look at the modes of commercial vehicular traffic that will come in and out of the airport versus people that are coming in to drop off for pickups and drop offs because they're coming to pick up grandma, or they're coming to pick up their servicemen or women that are arriving here. A lot of different movements that occur. But future, as we start to look at it and what we're planning for, Tampa just recently launched its first air taxi. So you'll hear advanced air mobility, or you will hear vertiports and heliports. London for the Olympics in 2024 will have the first initiative launched, as what we call eVTOLs, electric vertical takeoff and landings. And this is where you have small drone type aircraft that are now moving in a different air class space, connecting people as quickly as possible. So is the development for the concrete going to be required? There's a ton of highways that go up, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 feet up in the air that allow for people to move. And is that going to be the future? To be determined. I can tell you we're planning for that and looking at that as well. As you heard, Jeff talk about the ability to connect to Stone Oak, the connection that they have there. Do we install, an air taxi or, a heliport or a vertiport into those locations that can connect easily to the airport? That is the future. So you may take your car from your home, drive it to a location like that, grab an air taxi, come straight in, already be, vetted and have already gone through your security, divestation, similar to what you would get through a TSA checkpoint, and just go straight to your aircraft as you arrive here on the post-security side of the airport. Those are things that we're looking at and considering for a long-term perspective as we build out the new terminal complex. And we've got to be considerate of that because we want to be setting the trends as we go forward into the way by which people are going to be moving, whether it's for business or whether it's for leisure. So that's something that's very attractive. I will just add the last piece. How do we make it easier for people to, when they arrive here at the airport, if they're coming for a convention, and their ability to connect on an air taxi, right, or an eVTOL directly from the airport into downtown in less than 3 minutes? Today, yes, it's very attractive as we're, very close to the central business district, the CBD. But imagine arriving here, grabbing your bag, jumping on an air taxi, and in 3 minutes, you're sitting at the convention center. That changes lifestyles, that changes the quality of by which people are moving, and it attracts people to want to do business here in San Antonio. So those are things that we're already considering as we move forward.
Okay, I love this vision of the future that you've just painted. I'm going to ask Jeff to do the same thing and talk about the VIA ART project. After many transit setbacks, VIA is finally close to breaking ground on its first bus rapid transit line. The green line will pick up at the airport, run downtown, and end at the Spanish Missions. Unlike a normal bus line, this is designed for speed with ticketless entry, designated lanes, and traffic signal optimization. Explain to our audience who would be the users of a line like this. Is it commuters? Is it current bus users? Is it people who currently don't live in San Antonio yet?
I'm going to say all of those, right? So first of all, I just want to, because I saw a question come up over here. Why is VIA not getting the money, the sales tax until 2026? I thought I'd respond to that because that's the money that enables us to do the project, right? And that's because in 2020, the vote took the available sales tax and split it between the SA Ready to Work program from that point until 2025, and then VIA starts getting it. So that was kind of the genesis of that gap. But we've been able to move the program along because we used relief funds from COVID to help cover that gap in time. So let me talk about ART. ART is a rapid transit line, right? Rapid transit meaning that it is faster than traditional bus. It's going to be more frequent than traditional bus. We're going to go in with a 10-minute frequency. As I said today, our average frequency is 30 minutes. Now, if you look at a curve of consumer desire, let's just say, and you ask consumers, and this has been done both nationally and even locally by the MPO, I believe, if you ask a commuter, would you be willing to consider riding transit if it ran every X minutes? Well, if X is 10, about 85% of the public says they would be willing to consider transit. When you get to X being 30, about 5% of the public is going to consider. So if you think of where we are today, we're at that 5% level. 95% of the public is not going to be interested in pursuing what we're doing. We're trying to move up that frequency curve. ART will provide that frequency. We'll have dedicated lanes throughout the majority of the corridor. We will have vehicles, advanced rapid transit vehicles. They will have three articulated like the current Primo, with the accordion in the middle, longer bus, have 3 doors on both sides, because sometimes you'll board, depending on where you are along the alignment, sometimes you'll board on the curb side, sometimes you'll board on the other side. Those buses will talk to the traffic signal system. And so we talked earlier about how important it is to upgrade our intersections and our traffic signal operation, because that greatly influences mobility and ease of access. So we will talk to the traffic signal systems, not like an ambulance. We're not going to get that kind of priority, immediate priority, but we will get limited priority to help us either extend a green time or shorten a red time and move the vehicle along. And then, and Andrea, you hit on what I think is one of the biggest pieces, which is that we will be collecting fares in the station, much like a rail system, right? You pay your fare in the station. So when the vehicle pulls up, it pulls up, the doors open, you get on, level platforms. So if you're in a wheelchair, you can go on, doors close, and you're out of there. If you ride the bus today, you know that it is that interchange at the fare box that introduces a major piece of delay along the route, and we're getting rid of that. So the combination of all those efforts to make that line more attractive from a consumer perspective, I think yes, it will serve current users. Of course it will. It'll serve them better. They will have greater access to jobs. So let me back that statement up. As we talk about transportation, we haven't talked about equity in transportation. So the average VIA rider comes from a annual household income of $25,000 or less. So everybody listening, just think about what you would have to do to your budget to live on $25,000. And unfortunately, oftentimes these people are in a position where in order to get to work, they have to think in terms of, do I want to invest in a car or do I want to feed my family? Those kinds of things. If you look at job access today and you're coming out of 207, which is the poorest zip code in our area, you can only reach about 12% of jobs within a 45-minute commute on the bus. And the ART line is going to greatly expand the capacity and the number of jobs you can reach. For example, if you live at near Roosevelt and Steves, which is where the ART ends on the south end, if you live down there, you'll be able to get to the airport on transit in half the time that it takes today. Now, the airport's a major destination, but there's a lot of points in between. There's a lot of employment in the airport area, the mall area, and then again in the downtown area. So we're trying to make all those connections for commuters, for our existing riders, for people who are visiting. I think, if you have an attractive product out there, it becomes a lot more of interest to just about anyone.
Yeah, and I think as this green line vision is becoming more clear to people, in the last couple of weeks, we've heard a lot about, so what will this corridor look like at the end? And I know that's a little beyond your purview, but there's an animation on the Keep SA Moving website that shows like very dense buildings on the side of the green line that aren't there today. Can you paint a picture of sort of what that corridor will look like at the end?
Well, of course, VIA has no control over land use. I'll start with that, right? But there's been increasing interest in what's called transit-oriented development, or TOD. I believe City Council is going to be taking up TOD. VIA has received 2 grants to allow us to work with our city to modify the development code to encourage densification of development around those transit centers. And so what Phil said earlier about the infill development and the lack of it, making it a challenge to transit. So transit-oriented development and development codes that would encourage development in and around those station areas will, by definition, optionally at least, increase density. I don't know that those buildings are a true representation of what actually ends up there. But the whole idea is, as with all transportation systems, that access engenders development. It's not a surprise or an accident that regional shopping centers are at major freeway interchanges, because that's a point of high access, right? And so the access to ART system will likewise engender, on a more local basis, that kind of increased activity.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by how bullish people are on what kind of traffic that this line will bring to San Pedro. Brian and Phil, if you look at the explosion of growth on San Antonio's northwest side with residents moving in droves, can you speak to some of the road projects that need to happen to relieve congestion in those areas?
So if you're looking out the I-10 corridor, TxDOT, of course, has plans in the works to expand I-10 all the way to Bernie. Currently, it's 2 lanes each way. They're looking to expand that to 3 lanes each way, plus an HOV lane, as we talked about before, to encourage carpooling, possible transit out that way. I know V is looking at a park and ride out near the county line, so that would certainly facilitate that. More of the growth now is actually starting to swing towards the west, so more projects will need to be looked at along 1604 West, starting maybe from the Bandera Road area south to Highway 90. I know TxDOT currently has a study underway to look at future expansion of 1604 along that corridor. I believe VIA is also looking at a park and ride in the Alamo Ranch area. And then I think probably one of the biggest areas that's coming up is the Highway 90 corridor headed towards Castroville. It's already seen a lot of growth in the past few years. More to come. There's huge developments being planned out near Castroville, and that area is already very congested. So again, TxDOT has plans in the works, mostly waiting on funding to expand Highway 90 from Loop 410 going out towards Castroville, towards 211 in that area. And then going even further in the future, looking at perhaps the 211 corridor. It's currently a 2-lane road. The middle section just recently opened. That's going to open up a whole nother area for development. And so TxDOT has plans on the shelves for eventually expanding that to a freeway. So we could be looking at possibly a 3rd loop or at least a belt line along that corridor as well. And then all the streets in between, county roads, farm to market roads, and all will also need to be looked at for upgrading, expansion, extensions, and so forth. And all that's in the plans. There's lots of plans out there if you go look for it. And you just have to, again, kind of, some of it's, like I said, you have to wait for the development to happen before it can be built. Some of the developers build as they go along, and some of it just needs to wait for the funding.
And I'll add a little more broadly to it too, to kind of what Jesus and Jeff have already commented on. Where people live and how they choose where they live is an important part of brought up when we talk about transportation. And I'll admit, myself as a research scientist that focuses on transportation and a lot of other transportation planners, we like to think that what determines where people live. In reality, there's a lot of different reasons why people choose to live where they do. And transportation is about in the middle of the pack when it comes to importance. So things like affordability, huge, of course, but also things like neighborhood characteristics. So is it the type of neighborhood that you want to live in? Is it safe? Are the school quality, are the schools in that area, a good idea? One thought would be if school quality is really tied to where people live, it might make sense to beef up the school quality in a certain area and attract people naturally to that area. And while that change happens, we can much less expensively build up the transportation network in that area so that as people arrive, we're offering services for them. The other thing that's really important to remember is that in the post-COVID world, people's behavior has changed pretty radically. And Jesus kind of touched on this a little bit with being able to work kind of remotely. For example, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm able to work my job in Texas. That's a really nice perk that I'm able to do. You'll see that people with the flexible work schedules that they often have now, they might have to go in 2 or 3 days a week, but there are 2 or 3 days where they don't have to. Or they might, instead of an 8 to 5 type situation, they might be able to go in 10 to 3. So they can run their errands at different times of day. They're on the road at different times of day. They can live in different locations because the nature of traffic or their commute is different. So you're seeing things like people moving out to New Braunfels or San Marcos because, housing quality might be less expensive there, or it might be, in a more natural environment or closer to their favorite, sports team, or university. You'll see a lot of things like that happening. You've also we've seen this in the numbers, your traditional morning peak and an afternoon peak is being flattened. And now your capacity being used during the middle of the day is going up. So we're already using what we already have a little more efficiently, but we need to prepare for these changes and plan for them ahead of time so that we can, be a little bit more adaptive.
Yeah, and I think that leads right into our next question about it's hard to talk about transportation in San Antonio without thinking about the San Antonio-Austin corridor and that projection that maybe this is going to be a mega metropolis someday along I-35. From each of your perspectives, what does that look like in 10 years? What is going to be the menu of options to travel between San Antonio and Austin? And what do you think that does to people's commuting? Do you think that makes it more realistic to live in one and to commute to the other?
In 10 years, I fully see, the I-35 corridor. I live in South Austin, being built out basically from my house all the way to San Antonio, along the freeway. I think that is coming. It's something that has happened in, the DFW area. I don't know that it'll be as intense as the DFW area, but we're definitely, both Austin and San Antonio are gaining the population to support that, and housing prices in Austin are definitely pushing people south. And I recently read a study that showed just how many people from the Austin area and southern Austin area commute to San Antonio and vice versa. So I think you'll see a lot more of that happening. I would love to see rail between the two cities with intermittent stops. That can be a touchy subject for many reasons in our state. I would also like to see some sort of air taxi service. I think that would be really fun. But for the next 10 years, it might just have to solely rely on the I-35 corridor and possibly the 281 corridor connecting the two regions.
Which TxDOT has put out plans to go up on I-35, at least near San Antonio. Is that something that we are going to realize the benefits of anytime soon?
That's actually underway, as you may know if you drive on that side of town, especially around IKEA. That whole northeast corridor starting from Loop 410 headed out towards 3009 will be double-decked. It's a project that's underway. It's got about 5 years to be done. Of course, where that project comes to an end, then what do you do north of there? And that has not been decided yet. I think we kind of lost a major opportunity with Highway 130, State Highway 130 being built so far to the east and not having a good linkage into the I-35 corridor. And that dissuades a lot of people from using it as an alternative, myself included. My parents live in the San Marcos area, and I would love to go up 130 most weekends, but it's just not convenient for me because you have to drive all the way to Seguin. This recent legislative session, they actually was a bill filed, I believe, by Donna Campbell in New Braunfels, looking to essentially take money and dedicate it towards building a connector from I-35 to 130 in the New Braunfels area. That bill didn't get very far. Maybe it'll come back in the future, but it is a concept I think that is going to be very important for the future to help manage the traffic along I-35, give people an alternate route. There's also a freeway planned along Highway 46, I believe, between New Braunfels and Seguin that may also serve as a sort of a connector in that area. I do think there is a growing appetite in this region for rail between San Antonio and Austin. I do think a lot of people would use it. Probably the biggest impediment to making that really work is the connections on both ends. When you get to wherever you're going, how would you get that last mile? Somebody going to pick you up? Is there good public transportation? Do you use an Uber? So forth, things like that. So I think that's the main corridor. I think there's a good, like I said, an appetite for it, and then you just have to figure out the ends, how to make that work so it's very efficient for everybody and makes it very attractive.
Jeff, from your perspective?
So first of all, the I-35 project in Bexar County includes, in those elevated lanes, there's 3 on each side built in the outer separation. It includes 1 lane in each direction for which they're calling, I believe, a managed lane. An HOV lane is a type of managed lane. And so there will be an opportunity for some form of high capacity connection, rubber tire high capacity connection as that project moves forward. Probably the biggest question is who, as in most of these things, right? Who pays for it? VIA nor Capital Metro are funded to run buses between our cities. I believe it would be of some interest to state and TxDOT, to a Department of Transportation, to take a look at that alternative way of serving the demand. And I will tell you that the TxDOT has begun a statewide public transportation coordination plan, which is a first in their history. And it's taking a look at where you can have the connections between cities. And Brian, to Brian's point, when you get into those cities, how do you connect, right? The old Lone Star Rail plant, in fact, connected at our Central Plaza, which is the most transit-rich point in all of Bexar County. So that was a good thought, right? And it may be a part of a future plan. But in the meantime, TxDOT has a sincere interest in exploring those kinds of connectivities and where what generally public transportation might be of interest to the state.
Well, and we touched on this a little bit at our Texas Tribune Festival, where we talked about the difference between housing issues in Bexar County and in Austin, and what kind of lessons can we learn since the growth hasn't hit here quite like it has there? What can we take away from their experience in Austin as far as getting ahead of things?
There's a few things that can be done now, and then there's some things that take a little longer. There's going to be a need for density regardless. A lot of times density is kind of a 4-letter word. And what everyone needs to, take a deep breath and remember is that, we're not going to become New York City overnight. We're not talking about, building a 60-story skyscraper right next door to your house, although that happens in Houston, but that's Houston and they're different like that. That I think that nuance was lost in some of the Austin discussions when they were trying to revise their development code. So keeping that in mind, that density is good. It should happen when it's done contextually and appropriately in the right places. So an easy thing that can be done to start would be allowing accessory dwelling units. So, a secondary home on a lot, single family lot, that's huge right there. Also, looking at lifting minimum parking requirements is another really big thing. A lot of times developers want to build higher density projects or what's called the missing middle. So it's duplexes, fourplexes, triplexes, all the way up to 20-unit apartments. There's just not enough of that type of housing stock really anywhere west of the Mississippi. And that's vital for, first homes, low income housing, transitional housing, things like that. So lifting that minimum parking requirement goes a very, very long way. Other things that would be huge, especially in a suburban styled city like San Antonio, is creating commercial neighborhood centers. So, small commercial areas within neighborhoods or near neighborhoods where, I don't have to get in my car and drive to a convenience store to grab some milk. I can walk out of my house, walk 5-10 minutes, or take a bus very easily and get there, get the milk that I need and get back, to whatever I'm cooking. Things like that are relatively easy to do. Long term, we need to be rethinking how we do zoning. The current process of how we zone things and separating uses isn't really conducive to, higher density, high growth scenarios. We also need to think about how we reuse land that we've already built on. That's a really, really crucial element that I think a lot of Western cities west of the Mississippi haven't ever really had to think about, but our partners to the east of the Mississippi are grappling with and, have a better handle on.
That conversation about minimum parking is definitely coming here as part of the transit-oriented development. How has that gone in Austin? Are these buildings, do people move in and still have the expectation of being able to park? Has it worked?
I think I read this in the news this week or last week. Austin became one of the first cities to actually remove the minimum parking requirement. So it's very new for us. But in the areas where it has happened, I know Los Angeles maybe 10, 20 years ago lightened. They still had one, but they lightened the load. That caused a housing boom. They were able to build so much more because their minimum parking requirement previously pretty much prohibited anything other than a single family home. So the idea with removing that parking limit, here's the thing too, when you remove that parking limit, it's not that developers are going to develop zero parking spaces. They understand there's money in building the right amount of parking. But they know contextually with what they want to build, what the right number of parking spaces is. We shouldn't rely on this blanket regulation that shoots everybody else in the foot when somebody wants to do something clever.
Yeah. I think we probably have time for one last question here. We are looking at data that shows people coming here over the next decade will be coming largely, a lot of them from other places, particularly from the coasts. What are their expectations when it comes to transportation options, and how do those align or not align with the needs of the current population? And
I'll jump on it. Jump on it. So it depends on which coast, of course. If they're coming from the West Coast has a culture of high suburbanization, a very freeway-oriented culture. I remember when I lived in San Jose, California, that they looked at Texas with great fondness because Texas was the only state that had higher use of vehicles than California. So it was kind of like, we're not the highest, right? And didn't want to be the highest, I guess, in that point. So the expectations that those people bring, for example, is that we'll have a robust and effective freeway system. And I can tell you that San Antonio's freeway system today operates better than San Jose's freeway system operated 20 years ago. So that's an advantage, right? We do have people that come from Chicago, et cetera, who say that they're shocked that a city the size of San Antonio has so little transit available. And to frame that up, we are the 7th largest city, but we are the 27th largest transit system. So we are, way behind the curve there, which is why somebody moving from a transit-rich environment like Chicago would be disappointed.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that before we wrap up?
I'll add too, a lot of the East and West Coast cities have a culture of bicycling. And pat yourselves on the back. San Antonio has done a fantastic job of promoting and supporting bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and just the culture of cycling makes my life as a researcher in that area very easy. And while cycling can't really fix congestion, it definitely provides options for other smaller, more local trips. And I think if you look around San Antonio where cycling infrastructure is available, you do see some of those denser neighborhoods, some of the neighborhoods with a little more character, the places that people want to go to, like the Pearl District.
You're going to have to say more on that. How does San Antonio fit into your research on Vikings? Because we have obviously some very different opinions among the biking community about whether San Antonio is bikeable or not.
Yeah. So I do a lot of research on bicycle and pedestrian work, both for the state and for others. I'll put it this way. Biking in Texas is a very low bar. San Antonio has gone well above that low bar. I think the only other comparable city might be Corpus Christi. They have a pretty built out network and they support some of that. For a large city in Texas, San Antonio is doing a fantastic job, primarily with culture. Biking and walking is very much a cultural thing, and as is driving or taking transit. And for years, San Antonio has promoted, you have your ciclovias and bike or walk to school, bike or walk to work days, your different festivals, things like that. Those go a long way in promoting that culture.
Okay.
Andrea, if I could just add to everything that's been stated with regards to the airport, it's one of the reasonings in the strategic development plan that was completed in 2020. When I first arrived, we were wrapping that up. It's very important that the airport is where it's at. Its proximity to the central business district and its ability to connect. As you talk about people migrating from other cities, states, or countries coming into this city, I encourage everyone to go see how long it takes at other cities to get to the airport and your ability to connect to where you want to get to as you plan your itinerary, whether it be by flight, by bike, by train, or by bus. The airport is centrally located, and I think that is a big, attractive, and very positive feature to this city. Which, as we grow and expand, and we make those decisions, it should be based on the availability and the proximity of the airport to all parts of San Antonio.
Yeah, I wish you could have seen my parents' face when they were here last weekend and learned that the airport is only 10 minutes from downtown. They're like, maybe we should move to San Antonio. Thank you all so much. This has been super interesting, and I want to thank our 2023 presenting sponsor, the City of San Antonio, as well as our Changemaker, Engagement, Innovation, and City Builder sponsors for supporting this event. We have so many other great events happening this week. My boss, Lee Munsell, is moderating an event on sports this evening. Isaac Wines, our education reporter, is doing one on the changing face of education later this week. That is a virtual event. I hope that you guys can tune into all of these, and there will be a link available after this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you.